Hi, everyone. I'm Dean Francis, president and founder of End Kratom Addiction, and this is our very first podcast. Just really excited to start at the beginning of the story of Kratom. I've got on here today Frank Younker, who actually was a DEA diversion supervisor who was tasked at the time by the FDA to compile a lot of the evidence that brought kratom to a Schedule One controlled substance. And then we have also Chuck Grinstad, who is was back in the day an FDA special agent in charge, who was investigating a lot on kratom. And then also Michael Templeton, a DEA special agent, 25 years. All of these guys retiring from these agencies. Michael just understands so much about what's happening overseas with kratom and how it gets imported. And so I think it's going to be just a great discussion. And so let's just jump right in. Frank Younker, tell us, like, back in the day, where this began for you.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. It's a well-deserved podcast for sure. Back in, say, mid-2014, I was contacted by the FDA out of Cincinnati, Ohio. They had come across a shipment of kratom, and they called up here because they didn't know what to do with it. When I say up here in my office in Cincinnati. And of course, at that time, I had no idea what kratom was, what it did, or anything of that nature. It wasn't even really under DEA's purview because it's not scheduled. But I educated myself. I worked with the FDA investigator there in Cincinnati and compiled all kinds of data that was then used by our DEA headquarters to ultimately try to place it in emergency schedule one.
Yeah. So tell us a little more about that and just kind of your experience after seeing that the DEA then withdrew scheduling.
Well, when I checked with our headquarters people, they had a small tickler file on Kratom. It was nothing extensive. So they were just kind of keeping track of it as bits and pieces may have come in over the course of years. And I asked them specifically what they needed from the field or what data they needed to make it a Schedule One controlled substance. And so they told me what they were looking for to compile the data. And so with that information, myself and the FDA investigator, we went through and compiled everything that we could through their seizures across the country, my contacts in Thailand at the time, finding out where it was made, how it was being shipped, where it was being shipped to. We were following shipments, making controlled deliveries of the kratom to different parts of the country just to see who was getting it. And so overdose deaths, overdoses, anything related to that was put in a file, documented down, sent down to the DEA headquarters for them to compile with their scientific people to do what they needed to do to make it an emergency schedule one.
So you started with what is kratom. By the time you finished filing all of that evidence, what was your view of this?
It wasn't long before I knew that kratom basically had no legitimate medical purpose. I mean, to me, it was tantamount as almost like a coca leaf. I mean, it's plant-based. It's being imported when it's really not supposed to be imported. Everything was pretty much falsified on the import documents that are coming in the ports. And we're talking tons of kratom that's destined from, say, the port of Los Angeles or any of the other ports, to different places across the United States for then further distribution, to whomever.
And what was that period of time?
My involvement would have been mid to early 2014 till when I retired in December of 2014.
Okay. So about a 6-month period.
Maybe probably a little bit longer than that, 6 to 8 months, give or take, somewhere around in there. And then all that data during that time that we came across and that the FDA investigator, who did a really great job of compiling all of that, was sent down there to make it easier for the Drug and Chemical Evaluation Section of DEA headquarters to evaluate the data to do what they needed to do.
Yeah. So you then retire. What went through your head when you then learned the DEA was withdrawing from the scheduling?
Well, when I retired, the first thing that I kept seeing is everywhere when you go to these smoke shops and vape shops and gas stations and every place else, it's displayed prominently across their front window along with all the other stuff, Kratom sold here. So it kind of hit a nerve. So a friend of mine who was a section chief down in headquarters at the time, who I kind of kept up with and who would be the person who introduced or would put the scheduling into the Federal Register, called me and said, "Hey, Frank, you know, we're trying to work on this, but we're getting a lot of pushback. We're getting basically almost canned letters from Kratom people and Kratom industry flooding the comment section, of the Federal Register is why this shouldn't be." So it was almost like the standard letter, people just put their name on it or sent it in, from somewhere or all through the United States.
Yeah, and I can't remember the number of comments. It was a significant number, but just to repeat that again, the person that you were speaking with kind of recognized much of this was sort of a copy and paste. Is that right?
Correct. That is correct. Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. That's what he told me.
And so you then see that the DEA has stopped, and you've been kind of watching this over the last 10 years. Talk just a little bit about what has been going through your mind as you've seen this story continue.
Well, when he told me that and nothing further happened, right? Like it's almost like the Federal Register got pulled and it kind of the scheduling process, you know, went into thin air somewhere or another. I kind of figured, well, it's the typical political bureaucracy that's, down in Washington, D.C., not having known why any of this was or who might have been behind it, et cetera. But like I said, as I drive around, it hits you. It's, as you say, it's unfinished business because it's like it pokes you every time you make a turn or you stop somewhere and you look at a tobacco shop or a smoke shop or a gas station. Kratom hits you right in the face. It's bold, neon signs, hand painted signs, everything on the front, and it's like a slap in the face to those people, myself, the FDA investigator who did all that, and all the other people that helped, try to put all this data and information together that the DEA wanted. It's like it didn't register, didn't have any effect, or somebody, just put their thumb on it and it went away. And it kind of sticks with you because when we take this job for myself, I can't speak for the other people, but I'm pretty sure I can, you know, you spend 30 years of your career, trying to protect the public from all sorts of different drugs, you know, legitimate, illegitimate, anything that can harm the people. And so that still sticks with me. And when you see something that was very close to being accomplished and then kind of goes away in thin air for whatever reason, it just kind of sticks with you and it doesn't make you, makes you feel like there's something missing.
Yes.
Unfinished business.
Unfinished business is the title I gave to this podcast because of you. You have watched this unfold. I know from talking with you, it's really breaks your heart every time you hear so many of these tragic stories. But there is a file somewhere in Washington, D.C. that has all of this. And I've now learned from you that a member of Congress can request it, which I believe will be happening soon. So am I correct about that?
That's correct. Everything that was done on my end is in a DEA file. I'm pretty sure everything that the FDA investigator did is somewhere in an FDA file, both probably in our offices in Cincinnati and probably in the main, headquarters repository of each of the agency. So those things exist and have existed since 2014. And I'm sure everything else that's been done since I retired end of 2014, so say 2015 on forward for the next 10 years, anything that has to do with Kratom somewhere is in the DEA file. And I'm assuming that's also the same from the FDA.
Yeah. And so,
Because what she did, what the investigator from FDA did and helped put together, spreadsheets and graphs and charts, documentation, shipments, seizures, everything else like that. That's all in there. And that's all stuff that members of Congress or somebody should take a look at to see exactly what it was that came so close 11, 12 years ago. And it should be more exponential now because there's a lot more to it. So to me, it should be a no brainer. But, you know, that's
Yeah.
just me.
And so before we go over to Chuck, what's interesting to me is in 2016, when the DEA goes to schedule and creates the public comment period, Matt Salmon, U.S. congressman at the time from Arizona, went out and successfully secured 51 signatures from other members of Congress. And according to Mac Haddow, the leader of the American Kratom Association, former chief of staff for Health and Human Services, he said Matt was able to do this in a very short period of time, which I just want to emphasize for anyone that ever hears this story, because it's very clear to me those people were trusting whatever Matt Salmon told them. I am certain from talking to you that none of them were probably made aware by Matt that there is a file somewhere, that they could have been looking at. And I have a feeling when this file is pulled, there's going to be many people that actually see it and deeply regret trusting him to put signatures on a letter that actually was used to help stop the DEA. And so, I don't know, grateful for all the work that you did back then and helping us just connect the dots. Any final words there you want to add, Frank?
Well, I think with the individuals that you have compiled together and your work with Congress, because that's going to be a key. And I agree with you 100%. I don't think any of those individuals that signed that letter probably even knew of the existence of what was going on. I mean, they should have, by the sheer nature of it being put into the Federal Register. They would probably think that there's data that's there. I have no idea why they probably didn't look or didn't want to look, or how that came about, why their signatures are on there. And I just hope with your pushing and the folks that are helping out, and I'm glad to be a part of that, that this finally gets done for the help that those people that have either died or have serious addictions to this drug, we can make a difference.
Yes, thank you very, very much, Frank. To me, from everything I've learned, there's the things that stopped the DEA in 2016 were, number one, a lack of awareness about that file. I don't believe Matt Salmon at the time made them aware. I think those members would have never signed had they seen that file. And number two is that a lot of those comments, I'm sure if we're able to pull them up, it'll verify the person that you had spoken to. There's just so much copy and paste here. The American Kratom Association from the beginning has been very organized. They will bring lots of people to make their comments, but I don't know necessarily that our federal agencies are simply going to make a decision on public health just because of a bunch of copy and paste in a registry. I think that letter that came from those 51 members probably held a lot of weight. There were also 13 U.S. senators who signed the same. But then there's also the moment where Senator Hatch from Utah calls the DEA administrator at the time. All of this is verified. We have a separate video you can watch. Mac Haddow, the leader of the American Kratom Association, tell the story and how that senator contacted the DEA administrator. And the quote that stood out to me was that he would rain hell on his head. Those were exact words, according to Mac Haddow, rain hell on his head if he did not back off. He was an acting DEA administrator at the time. Mac, according to Mac Haddow, he hangs up the phone and says, I don't think we have anything else to worry about. And I think for every American, that's just disgusting to hear that there's a high level senior level U.S. senator who's threatening someone in a position like that. And then someone else who's using trust he's built as a member of Congress to get other people signing on to something. And it just, to me, I could be wrong, but I think I'm pretty certain, because common sense, if most people would have been able to have access and really seen that file, I don't think anyone would have signed. And I don't know that Senator Hatch's phone call would have had as much of an impact. But anyway, let's move over to Chuck Grinstead. So, Chuck, tell us where you kind of start in. When was it? What happened? How were you involved?
Well, first of all, thanks, Dean, for having me on. Like Frank said, I think this is a very worthy cause and something that something that needs to be addressed, handled moving forward, because obviously the federal government up till now hasn't handled this problem, and it's a serious issue. A little background about myself: I was special agent with FDA, OCI in the Kansas City field office for about 10 years. Then I became an assistant special agent in charge, and then a special agent in charge. And our agency is the FDA, like I said, Office of Criminal Investigations, and we're the criminal investigative arm of FDA. And my experience with Kratom started approximately back in about 2012, 2014. It's been some time ago. And Kratom came up on some leads with some cases. We would get leads from DEA. We would get leads from local authorities about Kratom and what we could do about them, and if we could investigate it and prosecute it. So, as anything, we would start investigating it. And what we were told by FDA administration, and I want to clarify, it wasn't FDA OCI, the criminal arm, that said no. It was all the way up to the top of the administration that basically would always tell us, we're not investigating that, we're not supporting that, we're not giving you resources, and you can't look into those cases. So initially, when I was an agent, that happened, and so there was not much we can do. We also discussed and we learned about the effects of this product and what it was doing to people. And we thought it was a serious concern, and we would address it again. And they would basically say, well, this is a DEA problem. This is not an FDA problem. And that's kind of how we were told. And so when I became an assistant special agent, again, these Kratom cases came up, and we would start investigating them. And we were told again, we were unable to investigate it, use our resources, because FDA wouldn't use our resources to investigate it any further. And so by the time I became a special agent, there was a case that came up in Iowa where Kratom was being used in and basically a tea that was being sold. And the local authorities were very concerned because basically people were coming addicted to this product up in Iowa. There was lines forming out of the cafe like hours before because they were just craving to get this product, and was very addictive. And the local authorities again asked us for assistance, and we were told that we would stand down. We couldn't investigate it. Again, no reasoning, no background. They was just told that, we couldn't do it from the higher ups. And basically local authorities had to handle it with their ordinances and their jurisdiction. But it was very difficult and very hard for me to see this where, you see people having problems. And really, this is something that FDA OCI should have investigated. And we were not allowed to. And I just wanted to kind of share some things that I've learned, looking through all this, is that I've kind of looked at some websites that basically support Kratom and say that there's no federal law that it violates. Well, that's not correct. That's absolutely false. Basically, there's the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and FDA has basically spoken and said this product is not a dietary supplement. It's not a safe dietary supplement. Has not been studied. It is not a safe food because it hasn't been studied. So therefore, it is adulterated food and adulterated dietary supplement under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And I just want to clarify with anybody saying that it's not a violation of federal law. It is. And what's happening right now, and what's been happening over the last 10 or 15 years, is that we are stopping this product at the border. Basically, customs and our FDA people are stopping this product before it gets in. But once it gets in and gets passed, we are basically hands off, and FDA OCI is not allowed to investigate these type of Kratom cases. And just like Frank said, it's very hard for me to see it, putting in my face that, every time I walk by, that basically anybody, but more importantly, teenagers and kids can go in and get this product and off the shelf. I mean, that is just an absolute failure on our part, that someone can go in and take something right off the shelf, and obviously it would harm that person and cause serious problems. I mean, the FDA has stated, it can cause liver damage, seizures, and a substance abuse disorder. And with all those type of warnings, it's just it's a shame that these products are even out there for people to use in human consumption.
And remind me again what year it was that you were being asked to stand down, like, especially, like, when you think about that story in Iowa, like, do you remember getting a call, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so that was basically we get calls a lot of time from local prosecutors or even local police department. Iowa fell under our district, and so we got a call from the local authorities, and that was back in probably 2021, 22, I would say. And that's kind of how it all transpired. That we would get it, and we started investigating it, and we again, we wanted to help them, and we were told that we couldn't, we wouldn't be supported by our agency, and we couldn't open a case. That case in Iowa started back in 2021, 22, but I started looking at the cases when I was an agent back in 14, approximately, maybe even 2012. And then again, throughout my career, these cases kept on coming up. And so it was throughout that time period of approximately 2012 all the way up till 2025 that I had cases that we had looked into, and I'm basically told to stand down.
Through, you said 2012 to 2025 or 21?
Well, 21, 22, but obviously Kratom was still going on, and we were just continued told to stand down. But you're right. The last time I was told to stand down was the Iowa case in about 2021, 2022 time frame. Basically, approximately, yes.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize, anyone goes to the FDA, it's called FDA and Kratom. If you just, do an internet search for FDA and Kratom, they've got a whole web page there on Kratom, and it says exactly what you just said. It states very clearly it is unlawful to market Kratom as a dietary supplement, food additive, or a drug. It is not lawful. But what we're hearing from you today, which is kind of what I've known, but it's just shocking as an American. This is this is known to be something that is awful. It lists on the website all the horrible things that can happen to people. They warn against it. They have consistently always warned against it. But yet, at the same time, they're telling people like you to stand down, and like they don't follow through with the scheduling that was originally put in place in 2016. Not to mention, by the way, 2018. It's a separate story where a new FDA commissioner came in, had all the scientists put together all of the data and analysis that showed that there was a high abuse potential for kratom, as well as no proven medical use, which makes it a Schedule One. And the Assistant Secretary of Health stepped in and stopped it. Well, guess what? Guess who is president? Guess who caused that? Mac Haddow from the American Kratom Association, who brought in Dr. Jack Henningfield, the same man who had testified for Purdue Pharma that Oxycontin isn't that addictive and it's not that bad, and everybody who's dying getting addicted, they're just junkies and we shouldn't pay attention. And literally, whatever, he works his magic and somehow gets our Assistant Secretary of Health to kind of override the FDA, stop the 2018. And so, as an American, you hear this stuff and you're just like, this is awful. The number of people that have died, gotten addicted, lives destroyed, when there are people like you that taxpayer dollars are funding to go do the work to help protect us. And so, anyway, yeah, Chuck, what else would you add here? I know you're similar to Frank. It's got to be kind of frustrating, but also kind of break your heart when you hear all these stories.
It does. As Frank said, that we're all in this for the same reason, to protect American consumers, and go out and just protect people, and that's what we were assigned to do and wanted to do. And basically, with this situation with Kratom, we weren't allowed to do our job, and as a result, people getting hurt, and that obviously bothers me tremendously, and it needs to stop. It needs to be handled at the federal level, and it needs to be banned. And this is a product that's can really cause a lot of harm to people. And I just hope that with all your work that you're doing, Dean, and it'll come true soon.
Yeah. Well, thank you for contributing to this and just helping bring more to light. I keep thinking of that FDA webpage, and I mean, it literally still today says the same things. There's neonatal withdrawal syndrome. I mean, babies born into a state of opioid withdrawal. Like, this is horrifying. And soon we'll be interviewing physicians and others that are in neonatal intensive care that have seen this happen now for a long time. The other thing that the FDA website references is these liver enzymes that are necessary to break down commonly used prescriptions and over the counter medications. And if you take Kratom, it can inhibit those liver enzymes. And I think probably the stories that I've heard from so many parents that have lost children, that is the most common. It's, someone that was using some anxiety medication or maybe some pain medication or just Benadryl that interacts, and it doesn't happen, I've learned, always right away. It's a lot of times it takes a little bit and then but it's just shocking. This is there. It's still there today, and it's time for things to change. So, Michael, you've been a part of this now for quite some time. You see it really clearly. So I'll let you kind of introduce yourself and how you have now gotten involved in the story.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. So I'm a retired DEA special agent. I spent 25 years with the DEA, domestic offices as well as overseas. Spent 2 years in Pakistan, 2.5 years in Afghanistan, where I finished out my career when the country collapsed in 2021. So I know all about unfinished business. Anybody that served in Afghanistan trying to tackle the opium heroin trade, there's certainly a feeling of unfinished business, especially the way things ended there in Afghanistan. And to come home from Afghanistan after trying to fight that fight and then see another opioid directly right in front of your face everywhere you drive around, and then start learning about it, it's pretty disheartening. And I'm sure, we could fill up this screen with 1,000 different squares with 1,000 different law enforcement personnel that would probably have the same story, right? The message is that we all work together. You've heard both Frank and Chuck say, coming from Chuck being FDA, and Frank was talking about working with an FDA investigator and analyst. We all work together for this, and we've all experienced letdowns on trying to go after these substances. It's not the first substance that's come along. When Chuck was talking about when they got the call from the local law enforcement where they were selling kratom tea and people were lined up in the early morning hours. Well, there's a reason for that, because some people have working addictions, especially with opioids. So they have to get their fix in the mornings. We've seen this when I worked in New Orleans, where I couldn't believe when I had an ops plan to where we were going out and try to buy heroin at 7 o'clock in the morning. I thought, DEA agent, we're going to be up at late at night, it's going to be dark and we're doing stuff. No, it's 7 in the morning, because the heroin supplier was catering toward his customer base, which needed their fix first thing in the morning so they could get through the day. That's exactly what Chuck was talking about. So after I retired and started hearing more and more about Kratom, some things, I'm just trying to learn through open source. I wasn't there like Chuck was combating Kratom when I was in Afghanistan, combating heroin and opium. But a drug is a drug. Legalization of a drug it's marketed the same. You can look at how the cartels have shifted when there was a need to replace oxycodone and oxycontin, when pharmaceutical pill mills were starting to really crack down on that. DEA was cracking down on that, and other agencies. Well, it created a void. The addiction was already created by the oxycontin and of the world, but the Chinese filled that void with fentanyl, and of course the Mexican cartels were glad to start pressing pills that look like Mallinckrodt pharmaceutical blue M30s, which are still most prevalent today. But even with that, they're pressing out orange and green and yellow that looks like Skittles and Kit Kats. They're targeting a younger crowd, very similar to the Kratom. You're not going to see it in a brown bag. It's going to have bright colors on it with a hippo on it or an octopus on it. It's going to say certain words that ring, that seem safe, or seem fun, or that could help you. So drug dealers have always done that through marketing, whatever it was. So what I've learned, our job with DEA is obviously global. Have offices in over 80 countries. We have an office in Jakarta, Indonesia, which covers all of the Indonesian islands. The island of Borneo in Indonesia produces about 95% of the world's kratom. They produce more kratom per month than Afghanistan produces opium in an entire year. So you're looking at 4,500 metric tons per month of kratom coming out of Borneo. The majority of that's coming into the United States, into the port of Newark, port of Los Angeles, maybe some other ports, but primarily there. Guess people would be wondering, well, you've heard other people talk. If it's illegal, then how does it get in? Well, there's about 1.2 to 1.3 million shipping containers coming into our ports per month. And out of that, there may be 200 of those that contain kratom. Now, those 200 are loaded down. A 40-foot container can hold 27 metric tons of kratom. But there's only so many people at the port. You have Customs and Border Protection there their job is to inspect and to open containers that have been flagged for them to look at. But if the algorithms for CBP don't pick up on to even look for kratom, they're never even going to go look at that. They never knew the container came through their ports. They're looking for, nuclear material, biological material, materials, or even bugs that could kill our crops in Indiana, or flies that could take over the fly population and wipe out our cattle and beef production. There's a lot. And so since kratom is not a Schedule 1, it doesn't even show up unless people like Chuck, who are, really trying, who was back in the day, would actually call them and say, hey, we believe there's a particular container coming in. We have an active investigation. Can you guys help us and help inspect that? Look, I've had that same conversation with CBP from the DEA perspective, and I still had to be really, really nice and extend the olive branch to a different agency saying, please help me. I know you're busy, and try to get them to help me open up a container. It's very, it's competitive. There's just not many people there. So that's how it gets in. So it's a matter of luck or fraud. So let's say somebody is completely honest on their manifest, and they write, this is kratom and this is going to be for human consumption, which you're not going to find. But let's say they were. And so it somehow gets through because CBP never knew it came through. So now you have a 40-foot container that ends up in a warehouse somewhere in some state. They unload boxes full of kratom powder with, 27 metric tons. And then they have this kratom powder. They put it in the capsules, put it in their nice packaging, and it goes out all across the United States and ends up in stores. And it's sold in stores. Did they violate federal law? Well, yes, you heard Chuck earlier. Yes, they violated federal law because they've introduced a substance which the FDA has deemed harmful and cannot be introduced into our food supply or beverage supply or as a mineral or vitamin. So they're all breaking the law. And it even gets even worse when most of the time they're falsifying the manifest because they don't want their product seized. They're investing tens of thousands of dollars to get that product in. And if it's seized, they're going to lose that money. So when they defraud the United States government and lie on the manifest, they're breaking all kinds of federal laws. And these particular are serious felonies that carry 20 years in prison. And then when they're wiring the money to Indonesia to pay for the kratom that came through, there's money laundering involved. So my advice to kratom importers and kratom distributors is you might want to talk to a criminal defense lawyer, not just a lawyer that helps you with copyrights and trademarks. Because if this happens and the U.S. attorney's offices actually get involved, hopefully from DOJ and DC tells them, hey, we want to start looking at this. This goes back retroactive. They could be held accountable for every gram, every ton of kratom that came through, every dollar that was wired to Indonesia. They're looking at serious time and very serious fines and asset forfeiture of everything they've ever made. That's how serious this is. I just want people to understand that just because it's on a store shelf does not mean it's legal. It is not in the United States.
Yeah. So let's go back over to Indonesia, Michael. I heard Dr. Chris McGurty, who is considered a lead researcher on kratom at the University of Florida, say that there's never been a death in Southeast Asia, or maybe he said it was rare. It's been used for hundreds of years. No one's dying. And then of course the whole American Kratom Association, they run with that. It's so safe. there's not a problem in Southeast Asia. And so, yeah, help us understand more.
Okay, so the Kratom market replaced the rubber tree market. They used to grow rubber trees, right? And then the rubber tree market apparently declined. Then all of a sudden they see this boom of Americans wanting Kratom. That's why Kratom started replacing rubber trees. So it supports over 200,000 growers and harvesters on the island of Borneo. So anytime you're in the executive office overseeing the mass populace, you always look out for your people, right? So there's three different entities in Indonesia that we need to talk about. You have the executive branch, you have the equivalent of the DEA, which would be their narcotics bureau, and you have their equivalent of their health minister. Their equivalent of the DEA wants it scheduled one. Their equivalent of the health minister has stated that it cannot enter the beverage market, the food market, or the supplement market. It is forbidden for them to take that kratom and put it into those markets within the country of Indonesia. However, the executive branch says, well, we're certainly going to export it because it generates $7 million a year to otherwise, indigenous farmers that need the money. So they're perfectly fine from taking that raw kratom powder, bring it into two major ports in the main island where Jakarta is, and then out to the international market especially into the United States.
And so that's a far cry from the commercialization we have here, highly concentrated products, actually just even putting it in a powder. I mean, I'm sure if you just grabbed a leaf off the tree, chewed it a little or brewed it or something, this is pretty minimal stuff, but that is completely radically different than what we're doing here in the United States, mixing powder into our water bottles and then going on quickly for a lot of people into the extracts and concentrated products. So it's sort of night and day. I believe Thailand does allow some commercialization, but I still think it's even then restricted. I think some of the others have completely outlawed it as well. But it is. I just like to emphasize this concept that somehow, oh, it's been safely used for hundreds of years and it's been great in Southeast Asia, and that's just a bit on the untrue side. You're talking about the number one nation in the world that's exporting it, and it's prohibited. Like you can't put it into the food. You can't be out selling it in a supplement. You can't, that's not possible. So anyway, Michael, when did it first hit you that about Kratom? Like when do you remember when that happened for you and what you thought?
Yeah, just this year. It was 2026. I had a lot of other stuff going on, and of course, in Afghanistan and things like that. And it's just, there's always that moment where something speaks to you. I thought I was out of the drug enforcement arena. We all, when we reach the age of mandatory retirement, is 57, by the way. If you're a special agent of anything, of any agency, you're out at the age of 57. So you're looking for that next purpose in your life, right? So yeah, I don't know when it happened, but I just started seeing it and wanting to know more about it, and it just it really opened my eyes, especially after meeting some folks that I know we've talked to before, these doctors that are really bringing stories about how they're treating people with the addiction. I do want to go back to Indonesia real quick. On the island of Borneo, the government set up this testing lab, and you're going to hear some about this from the other side, that they've set up this state-of-the-art testing lab to where the kratoms are sampled to where they don't have metal in them, they don't have salmonella in them, and they're ensuring their quality before they're shipped out to the United States. I found that kratom lab. You can go to Google Maps Street View. It's in a fish and chicken open air food court market. That's what it is. It's a little semi-square. You can sit down and have a plate of fish for like the equivalent of 25 cents US and chicken. And back tucked in the corner is this high-speed kratom lab that the government set up. So, I just want people to understand, when you hear things like the government lab and quality testing and all that, don't think that it's, a big 4-story building in a metropolitan area where everybody's wearing gloves and masks and everything's pristine.
Wow. So my final question for you, Michael, is just, what would your message be to lawmakers today? And I do want to mention the FDA import alert is number 5415. And I believe it was originally established in 2014, where it makes it unlawful to import kratom. But we've got a combination of it's easy to mislabel, the difficulty with so many shipments coming in, and then of course our own FDA, kind of, hey, back off. I mean, these things that have allowed it. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, there haven't been people who have gotten in trouble and gone to prison, because if you are caught, it is a federal crime. But anyway, having said that, we've also established the FDA still says today it's unlawful to market it as a dietary supplement, food additive, or a drug. So despite all of this, state lawmakers are sitting there going, what do we do? And they of course hear the stories of people that say, man, this saved my life. I feel so much better now. And I got off of this drug, or, whatever these stories are. And and but now US lawmakers are beginning to hear it and are going to begin to have to decide also on what to do. I think we're going to see the pendulum has begun to swing for sure already. But your message to lawmakers that maybe are still getting their head wrapped around this, what would you say to them?
I would say we're a nation of states. We have 50 states, and listen to what's happening in your states. It's been made illegal in what, over a dozen, perhaps 15 states now. That's America. It's not, America is not situated in D.C. Listen to your states. Reach out to your constituents who are on the U.S. House or U.S. Senate that are from those states, and ask them what and why they did that, why their state legislatures did that in their own states. And then, of course, listen to the experts. Listen to the doctors that are treating everyone. Don't listen to me. I'm just, I'm an open source guy. I want to know. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to look it up and start interviewing people. Right? It's kind of third hand. I wasn't in the jungles of Borneo. I haven't seen it grown and harvested. I haven't gone with Chuck and tried to investigate this stuff. Listen to the experts that have been in the fight. Listen to the doctors.
Yeah, because it's overwhelming when you talk to people who are board certified in addiction medicine, pharmacists, toxicologists, coroners, medical examiners, people that are meeting these families who have lost a loved one, or meeting the person who has now suffered greatly from addiction, people that were sober from whatever it was, their opioid addiction of years ago, and heard this new harmless narrative about kratom and just complete relapses. These stories have just been on the rise now for quite some time, before the semi-synthetics that started in the last 2 years. Certainly that made it worse, but this has been going on a long time. It should have been scheduled in 2016. It had a chance to be scheduled again in 2018. It's the American Kratom Association that has been stopping this over and over. Every time I talk to someone up on the Hill in Washington, D.C., they're like, Dean, you have no idea. These American Kratom Association people, they're like all over the place. This is what's been happening. That's how it's been happening. It's led by a guy who's a former chief of staff at HHS, and the chairman of the board is still Matt Salmon, former U.S. congressman from Arizona. Their connections are deep within these agencies. They have had significant impact that has brought us to this point, and it is just flat time to change. And I think anyone listening to this, reach out to your state lawmakers, your federal lawmakers, and say, hey, enough is enough. I'll close with this. The American Medical Association, I just think, makes it pretty simple in their policy statement. The title of it is Regulate and Ban Over-the-Counter Kratom. And when they say regulate, they don't mean put the age 21 on the bottle and make sure it doesn't look good for kids. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about going through the appropriate clinical safety trials and the regulatory evaluation before bringing a product, the kratom products, to market. And it goes into it. It states it almost just like that. It must first undergo clinical safety testing, regulatory evaluation before being marketed or sold. They're not trying to pick on a leaf from Southeast Asia. I don't think anybody is. If somebody can figure out a way to do all the right testing and make it available safely, with medical oversight, well, then that's fantastic. But what we have today is something that is exploiting our dietary supplement laws and injuring, I think, what I often refer to as vulnerable population groups. Our son Cameron's a young track superstar, almost under a 4-minute mile. He is not looking for any illicit drug. He was attracted to this idea of it being plant-based, herbal supplement, good for focus and energy. Well, that's a young person like, hey, this sounds good. I'll never forget the guy who testified one time on a state hearing for us, and he said that he was trained when he was marketing his Kratom product that to tell people it was a natural alternative to 5-hour energy. That was part of his pitch. So that's young people. And then you have people that are blue collar workers. They have pain. They've had injuries and so forth, and telling them that, hey, this is a great natural way to treat your pain. And I'm not saying it can't be, but that's why we have regulatory and clinical safety testing. So a doctor says, hey, you only take it for so long, otherwise you risk being addicted and destroying your freaking life. So anyway, and then you have people anxieties, like anxiety, it gets crazy. Like, hey, this is a natural, alternative to your anxiety meds. And then the last one that just drives me insane is this idea this is going to somehow be a good way to treat addiction. Holy mackerel. The number of stories you hear from the addiction treatment centers today, of people just getting relapsed and fully addicted. And it's just disgusting, but they make a massive profit off of that because, as Michael would tell you all, it's cheap. You can buy it really, really cheap. And then you put it out there and profits are off the chart. This industry has no interest in going through the cost and time of the clinical safety testing and evaluations. That's not that they're here for profit, period. Many of them used to be in prison. One of the biggest manufacturers, the guy was the same guy behind a product called Spice that was synthetic cannabinoids that killed a bunch of people. These are the people behind the industry. Someone asked me yesterday about banning Kratom. I said, it's actually the industry I want to ban, when it really comes down to it. If somebody can figure out a way to make the leaf, good for somebody and it can be offered safely, well, that's fantastic. God bless you. But that's not what this industry wants. This industry has to be stopped. And I think today's discussion was great to go back to the beginning. How in the world does this ever happen? And because of you guys kind of come together, now we know, obviously, you all see drugs clearly. You have instincts, you're trained, you see it. And I like also, I'll finish with this, Michael. You said we could fill this up with 1,000 little boxes in our little podcast here today with 1,000 people from law enforcement all saying the same exact thing. It's just time for this to end. So thank you guys so much for just your time here today. Appreciate your service to our country and your care for other Americans.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.